Someone whispered.
It's her.
Another voice yelled.
It's Wendy Wynne, the girl who won the drawing. Way to go, Wendy!
Wendy smiled a little self-consciously. A man walked up to the limousine. He was dressed in boots, blue pants, a khaki shirt and tie, and a lightweight jacket with the Dinosaur World patch on the sleeve. He smiled at the girl.
Welcome to Dinosaur World. My name's Jake Dumel. I'm your...
He was interrupted by a piercing shriek. There was a loud flapping sound and a rush of wind as a huge shadow soared over the crowd. A few people screamed and ducked down.
The pterodactyls seem to be flying a little low today,
Jake observed.
As I was saying, welcome to Dinosaur World. I'll be your guide to Pangia.
Wendy was still looking at the enormous creature in astonishment.
I thought pterodactyls were little, like ducks or chickens,
she said. Just then, a voice came from inside the limousine.
Some pterodactyls, namely the Quetzalcoatlus of the late Cretaceous, had wingspans of over 40 feet. You're probably thinking of the little model hanging up in my room.
As you've probably guessed by now, it was Peter. Not winning the drawing had disappointed him, but he'd finally convinced his sister to bring him along as her guest. It hadn't taken much, just a promise to set the table, wash the dishes, and help her with her math homework every night for the next year. That's all.
This is my brother Pete. He knows everything about dinosaurs,
she explained matter-of-factly as they unloaded their camping gear. Jake smiled.
Well, he sure knows about pterodactyls, except they aren't really dinosaurs. They're flying reptiles.
I know. Pete told me.
She boasted. Jake smiled. It was obvious Wendy adored her brother. On the way to the boat dock, they walked through Mesozoic Mesa, past the petting zoo, the snack stands, and the nursery. People dressed in neat Dinosaur World uniforms were hurrying this way and that.
What do they all do?
Wendy asked.
It takes a lot of people to run a place this big. Engineers for the T-Rex express trains, guides for group tours. Teachers are always bringing their classes here. Keepers who help in the nursery feeding the baby dinosaurs. Gardeners to take care of all the plants and flowers. And a staff of scientists who spend time studying the animals.
They passed a herd of about 20 duck-billed dinosaurs.
Corythosaurs.
Pete informed his sister about the slow-moving animals that were grazing in a grove of pine trees. The largest one was over 30 feet long and must have weighed as much as 2 or 3 elephants. Their skin was pebbly, like the surface of a football, and colored in green and brown patches that helped them blend in with the forest and hide from hungry meat-eating dinosaurs. Pete knew they were corythosaurs because of the rounded, helmet-shaped crests, like weird rooster combs on their heads. They were making honking sounds as they ate. 2 men with clipboards were standing nearby taking notes. Pete asked Jake what they were studying.
They're monitoring the corythosaurs' diet to see if we need to move some of them to an area where there's more food.
How much do they eat?
Asked Wendy. Jake said,
That big guy probably needs 200 pounds of food a day. In fact, they need so much food, eating is about all they have time for.
Almost as though it had hurt him, the giant duckbill lifted his head, snorted, and then gave a trumpeting blare that made Wendy cover her ears. Pangia was about a half a mile from the mainland. Pockets of early morning fog still nestled on Dinosaur Sea, making the island appear ghostly and mysterious. Smoke curled from several small volcanoes. Flying creatures, too far away to identify, circled the island's rocky summit. A stray breeze scattered wisps of fog, and Pete could see tall, reedy plants clustered thick in a swamp, and strange broadleaf trees with gnarled and twisted roots growing at the base of towering cliffs. Occasionally, the smooth surface of the water rippled, as though unseen creatures swam just below. Pete thought he saw something that could have been a long neck arch up and out of the water in the murky distance. But when he blinked, it was gone. As he turned to say something to Jake, he caught Wendy's eye and knew she'd seen it too. Probably just a tree branch, he thought. Jake was busy checking their backpacks and gear.
Sleeping bags, cooking utensils, flashlights, food, radio.
Why do we need a radio? Do dinosaurs listen to W-Dino too?
Wendy wanted to know.
It's not that kind of radio.
Her brother said.
We need it to call for help if we get into any trouble.
Dinosaur World is full of surprises, not trouble. Still, you can't be too careful.
Jake assured the little girl. Then he loaded everything into their small boat, the Intrepid, and helped them aboard. After they had all put on life jackets, he started the engine and cast the line off from the dock. As they set off across the water to the dim, fog-shrouded island in the distance, Pete grinned and said,
Now the adventure begins.
A small flock of gulls, hoping for a stray bite of food, followed behind Intrepid. Other things followed the boat as well, creatures Pete had never seen before, almost like birds, about 4 feet long, with narrow, sharp beaks that they clicked together, making a sound like drumsticks on a tabletop.
Those are Hesperornis,
Jake told him.
They're primitive birds. They remind people of loons. They can't fly at all, but they're great swimmers and divers.
As they watched, several of the birds squawked and disappeared underwater, emerging moments later clutching wriggling fish in their sharp teeth.
What's that behind us?
Wendy asked. She pointed to a long, humpback shape that was moving slowly towards them. It looked like a boat turned upside down, except it was very much alive and bigger than any boat in Dinosaur World. Jake immediately increased the Intrepid's speed until they were further away.
That's something we don't want to tangle with.
A plesiosaur,
said Pete almost in a whisper.
The biggest plesiosaur that ever lived. An elasmosaur, almost 60 feet long. And there's only one thing it likes to eat as much as fish.
The sea monster's head emerged from the water. Pete gasped, and Wendy gave an astonished cry. Its neck was over 20 feet long. It arched up and up until it towered over the boat like an immense snake. It opened its mouth and hissed. Water dripped from its gaping jaws, and they could see its deadly teeth glittering. Its bright eyes immediately spotted a Hesperornis desperately trying to escape. Like a huge whip, the elasmosaur's head lashed out, and in the blink of an eye there was nothing left of the unfortunate bird but a few feathers floating on the water. Then the immense reptile turned its unblinking gaze toward the people in the little boat, eyeing them curiously. But after a moment, its appetite apparently satisfied, it turned and slowly swam away. Pete said,
Wow!
in an awed voice, while Wendy let out her breath in a relieved sigh. Jake said,
It's a good thing our boat goes faster than it does, or we might be in trouble.
At that moment, the Intrepid's engine coughed once and died. The small boat rose and fell on the waves. Without power, it was at the mercy of the sea. In the quiet, Wendy seemed to hear ordinary sounds louder than they actually were. Water lapping against the hull, the faraway rumble of volcanoes, the mew and cry of a gull overhead. She looked at her brother. He was standing up in the front of the boat, shading his eyes and gazing across the water like an explorer in a new land. He turned and grinned at her, and she felt better. Said their guide.
Guess it's time for me to earn my keep.
With that, Jake pulled 2 oars from the bottom of the boat, passed them through the oarlocks, and began rowing toward Pangia. They were still several hundred yards from shore when Wendy yelled.
Look!
The colossal creature churning through the water towards them was perhaps the most terrible monster to ever hunt the ancient oceans of the earth. A chronosaur. It was over 50 feet long and had jaws even bigger than the great Tyrannosaurus rex, over 8 feet long. As it swam, its massive tail whipped the water to foam. Just then, Pete saw another sea giant nearby, an enormous turtle bigger than a car, and it was heading straight for Pangia. It gave the boy an idea. He pawed furiously through his pack until he came up with a long rope.
Jake, if we could lasso that Archelon,